Then we'll start. Yeah, I'm going to talk about my experience using ReasonML in production. So can you see the next slide? Just so it's working. Cool. I'm Andreas. I've been doing front-end stuff for like 10 years or so, mostly React for like the last 6 years or so. First vanilla JavaScript, CoffeeScript, obviously, a bit of TypeScript, and last 6 months I've been working on a ReasonML project. So in like, I prepared this so that it assumes that you know a bit about React and about GraphQL and about ReasonML. So if like I say stuff that just sounds like gibberish, just ask. And if I need to explain something, just type in the chat. And it's also important to note that this is not like best practices or anything. This is just like our experiences, and we know like our way of doing stuff isn't optimal, and we don't have everything figured out, and there is tech debt and all that. So just don't take it as gospel. And I'm going to start just quickly going through the tech stack, what it looks like, talk about some pain points, and then talk about some really nice things. And I'll finish up with some conclusions on like how we feel about using ReasonML for a production app. So the project, it's a company called Top Agent Network. It's an online community for the top 10% of real estate agents in the USA. And it's a pretty nice project, like from this perspective, because it's a little bit of everything. It's like list views, it's search, it's communication functionality, it's like a lot of forms and some dashboards. So you get like all the different parts that you kind of want to try out if you want to figure out if it's a good fit to use whatever tech stack you want to use. So the backend is microservice with basically every language there is, I think. I haven't worked on the backend, but it's like Go and Haskell and OCaml, whatever, everything. And there's an Apollo GraphQL server, which is in plain JavaScript. And then there's the front end, which is what we're going to talk about. It's roughly 66,000 lines of reason in 420 files or so. There's also a bit of JavaScript, 22,000 lines, 500 files. Oh, are we on the wrong slide? Oh, it was lagging behind a bit. Okay, I don't think you missed anything important. Cool. Yeah, so it used to be a vanilla React and Redux app. Then it was converted to Reason React a while back, before the latest version of Reason React. So that means big parts of the app is in with JSX2, which are the old bindings to React before hooks came out. Then when hooks came out, a new set of bindings came out for Reason React that used and they're 0 runtime and like maps a lot cleaner to the React API. And most of the app is with the JSX3, so the newest version of Reason React. But we're still like gradually migrating stuff as we are working on them. We use Apollo with Reason Apollo hooks and GraphQL PPX, or actually the the maintained fork of GraphQL PPX. And for those of you who don't know what a PPX is, I will show you how the GraphQL stuff works later, but it's basically syntax extension. The design system is mostly built in JavaScript with style components and style system, and then there's a layer of bindings on top of the JavaScript files, because reasons. When we need to do styling in Reason, we use CSS, which is a layer on top of Emotion. So there's like a bunch of different tech. We use reformality for all the forms, but I'm not going to talk too much about that. That's just like to get a feel of what you need to build this kind of app. So pain points. There are some. First, GraphQL. GraphQL is amazing, and it's a great fit for Reason, but there is some buts. So the best practice that a lot of people are touting for defining GraphQL schemas is to keep as many fields as possible optional. That makes the schema flexible and easy to change. But that means that you will have stuff that you want to query where basically all the fields are optional, and you will get stuff that's optional, but you actually need it to be able to render something. So I'm going to give you an example later on, but we don't want to handle optionals everywhere, and that means we need to decode the response. And also, it doesn't, like GraphQL PPX doesn't default to convert stuff to records. It defaults to convert it to js.t, which is not as nice to work with. It's structurally typed, and it's just like the types become a bit weird. So ideally, you want to have stuff defined as records when you get it into your app. So take this GraphQL type. It's just first name, last name, email, and everything is optional except for the ID. And that becomes weird when you want to like query it and display it, because okay, it gets stuck every time I switch slides. Annoying. So yeah, you got ID, first name, last name, email, and first name, or like all the stuff except ID is optional. So what we need to do to be able to get this into our app is to, here we define the fragment, or it could just as well be a query, but we define it and we annotate with the function to decode this fragment or query. And then we have to define the type that we want this to be in our app, like after we decoded. So there we want first name to be required, because that's like the minimal thing that we need to be able to display the contact. We need at least the first name. And then we have a decode function, which you don't have to understand all of this, but basically it goes through the returned object, and if the first name is missing, then we return an error rather than an OK. So this decoder will return a result type, just the way that Pontus was talking about before, and the error will be first name was none if there is no first name. And then it passes the decoded object into the make function, and the make function creates the record that we want. So this is a bit verbose. It's not very nice. This could be a lot cleaner. But this is what we do for a lot of the GraphQL. because the schema is not exactly, it doesn't exactly match what we want to have in the front end, and sometimes we want to like do stuff to the data that we get back before we use it in the app. So if the schema looked like this instead, then it would be a lot easier. Then we could just define the type. Oh, what is const? I'll go back. So basically, don't worry about the syntax highlighting, but the const and sum are helper functions to just pass stuff through and decode them. So it just says that, okay, this, we know, we just return it as it was. So it came in as an option, we return it as an option. Whereas the sum function, it has to be defined, it has to be sum. Like the first name here is an option. It can be some name or none. And if it's sum, we pass it through. So let's go back to the nice version. So if the types match, if the types of the schema match what we want to have in the app, it becomes a lot nicer. Then we don't have to define the decoder. We could just use the built-in decoder, which is the annotation here, BS record. So BS record is the built-in decoder that just like matches with a record definition and converts to that. And here's just a quick example of how we use it in the component. So we have a use query hook that you pass in a query into the hook factory basically, and then in the React component you do use query, you get the result, and then just pattern match on that result. This is one of the really nice things about how ReasonML works. Like the pattern matching is super nice. If you forget any of these cases, then the compiler will shout at you. And if like any of your like assumptions about a data that you use is wrong, then it will also shout at you. But basically throw an error if there's no data, if there's an error returned, or if it's loading display loader. If there is data that we expect, then display the page that we want to display. So that's the super nice bit. So there is more pain, however. So let's go here. So the styling is a hard problem. It's a super hard problem. As far as I'm concerned, it's still unsolved. And that goes not just for Reason, but for React as well, or like the web. I think there's there is some nice solution, but we haven't really found it yet. And the styling solutions that we use aren't perfect either. So that's not so nice things, but it's not specific to Reason, I think. However, it does become a bit weird when you have like some stuff in JavaScript and some stuff in Reason. I think the best way is just to hide as much as possible within the design system or UI kit or whatever you have. So there are some unsafe operations that you need to do. For example, updating the Apollo cache, you need to like spread the objects or spread stuff onto an array or like mutate it. Those kinds of things are not very nice to do in Reason. So what we tend to do is just to like do that in JavaScript instead. That's one of the nice things about Reason is it has escape hatches. So when you need to do something in that's like, it's easy to fall back to JavaScript when you need to. But that's fairly rare. And like on a case-by-case basis, those things can be made a lot nicer as well. Like you just need to put some effort into like making that nice experience in Reason. It's a bit annoying to have to write bindings just because it takes time. It's not hard or it's complicated or anything, but it, like in JavaScript, you could just npm install. Here you, like if you use some binding, some library that there isn't bindings for yet, you have to write them yourself. The tooling, like the compilation for Reason is amazing. The Buckler script is really good. The editor integration could be better. It like at least for me using VS Code, it crashes sometimes and it's not super great. But in general, it's not worse than using like TypeScript in a project. But it's not like significantly better either, in my experience. So nice things. There are some nice things, especially the type system. I mean, it's amazing. If you compare it to TypeScript, it's kind of hard to compare it to TypeScript because TypeScript can be a lot of things. It could be like just a little bit of things on top of JavaScript and any types everywhere, which is horrible. But like if you have really strict TypeScript setup, then it's pretty nice. But with Reason, you have way less annotations. You hardly have to write any type annotations with Reason. And the variants and pattern matching are super great. That's like, as soon as you go back to JavaScript after having used variants and pattern matching, you miss it. Like it's a kind of, it's impossible to go back just because of that, basically. And some other nice things, there are no runtime errors. Like the errors that we've had in Sentry is like one promise rejection that hasn't been caught. But that's because we use JS promise and you shouldn't do that. We're switching. So you can have like proper type safe promises instead. And then other than that, it's just like GraphQL network chunk load errors. But there are basically no runtime errors. Oh, there we go. And it's nice to have no runtime errors in production, but there are also no runtime errors in development, basically. Like it almost never happens. Yeah, so we're switching to, I think it's called repromise. Maybe Anton, are you listening? I think he's the guy who made it. I'll post a link. But yeah, repromise. It's super nice. It basically, instead of like having then and catch, you get a result type back. So you get OK or error, and then you just match over that. It's super nice. Yeah, so refactors are super easy. Okay, thanks. Refactors are super nice, and like you can make a huge refactor and like have it run as soon as it passes the compiler. It runs as you would expect, as you expect it to. And that, like, first time you're coming from JavaScript and have that happen, you're amazed. So the build system is nice. They're fast and stable. Having no imports is actually, like, it's one of the things that you thought could become a problem on bigger projects, that everything is globally available, but it's not. At least we haven't found it to be. And just not having to import stuff is way nicer. One thing I do miss though is the ability to namespace. So you can't namespace like parts of your app. That would have been nice. and the reason is pragmatic, as I said. Like you could just hop out to JavaScript or like do some typecasting if there are like stuff that you can't solve in a nice way. And the other thing that is really nice is that everything is an expression, which means that basically anywhere you could just add curly brackets and define a variable there, and then the return, whatever is returned, is the result of the expression. And that becomes really handy. So you don't have to like define helper functions outside just to keep the code clean. Like, yeah, it's like quality of life thing that I wasn't expecting to like so much as I do. But I do have some tips that we've kind of learned the hard way. You should try to avoid open as much as possible. I mean, you could use it sometimes, but in general, it's a can of worms, because it makes it a lot harder to follow where stuff is coming from. And if you don't know open, it basically takes everything from one module and makes that available on another module. So basically it removes that module namespace. And yeah, we found it to just be confusing and make the code harder to follow. You have to type a bit of extra to use stuff if you don't open things, but that's worth it. Or just like explicitly add a module to your module. Yeah, be pragmatic. Don't try to solve everything like the nicest way. Use the escape hatches that are there. Don't throw exceptions or raise exceptions. The things that exist in Reason, like option types, result types, they're enough so that you don't need to throw, and it usually makes the code way nicer. And keep your types simple if you can, because it, like the next person coming to like really complex types and trying to understand them, it takes a while if it's like really complex types. So if you can keep it simple, do that. Yeah, open at the usage site. That's way nicer, like as close to the usage as possible if you need to. So yeah, some conclusions. Working with a nice language is fun. Like working with Reason feels like it's a really nice foundation, and there are pieces missing to make the whole experience really nice. Whereas JavaScript is kind of the opposite. It's a shitty foundation, but like all the niceties are there, but you kind of know that the foundation is not nice, and it feels way dirtier to use JavaScript in that sense. There are some low-hanging fruits to make the experience nicer. Like if you put some time into the like VS Code integration, the Reason language server, and like if there were more bindings to the popular libraries, and like the GraphQL support was a bit more advanced. It's not bad, it's just that it's maybe missing some like niceties. Then I think that would be like way nicer, at least for us. And I think that like we in our app code could also do quite a lot to make like the whole experience nicer, but you know, priorities. So So would I recommend using Reason? I know that this question has come up before on like the Reason Conf and in other places, and before people have said that no, it's a bit too immature, it's not there yet. But I would totally recommend it. If your team is on board with using Reason, then there's no reason not to do it. It's super nice. And I mean, it's not perfect, but it's way more enjoyable than working on TypeScript or JavaScript, in my opinion. So yes, are there questions, or are there like more of comments than questions? I hear nothing. So there were a couple of you that use Reason in production. Like, is there anything you would like to add, or like that you don't agree with? Oh, on the GraphQL, yes, the GraphQL schema thing. I'm against that best practice. I hate it. But I might not have seen the other side of that. I know like Nick Graff and a couple of other people are like really advocating for making stuff optional, but I would try to make stuff required if they should be required on the front end. Start from scratch or start with TypeScript, JavaScript? I would start from scratch in Reason, for sure. Only add TypeScript or JavaScript if you really need to. So how many are we working on the app? We're kind of 2 or 3 working full-time or full-time-ish on the front end. And then a couple more working on mostly backend. We did check out Urkel, or we haven't checked out. So I came into this project in like 6 months ago, and it's been around for a lot longer than that. So I think Urkel, or at least the Reason bindings, didn't exist back then. But I've checked it out before, and as far as I've been able to tell, like the caching story in Urkel isn't as nice as Apollo. So yes, I have checked out Reason Relay for a personal project, and I think that is amazing. From the things that I've used, and if we started a project today, I'd probably recommend Reason Relay. Is it easy to understand Reason code and TypeScript, JavaScript? About the same, like just reading the code, I think, but you get quicker feedback when, like, if you made an assumption that's wrong or something, or like if you want to, like, working with code that you're not comfortable with is a lot easier in Reason, because you have full confidence that if it compiles, then it works. So while it's perhaps not easier to understand a lot of the code, or like it's about the same, it's way easier to work with code that you're not familiar with. And some syntax things like the variants and stuff are really expressive and nice to read as well. Oh yeah, polymorphic variants. I skipped through that. So the problem with polymorphic variants is that they're not as type safe. Maybe I can switch to my other screen. Fuck that. So there's not as type safe. Like if you add a case, or like remove So if you add a case to a polymorphic variant in one place, and then that value gets passed on to some other place, if you don't annotate those types and like define the variant types and annotate it, the compiler won't warn you that you have a case that you don't match. So you can refactor stuff and like miss stuff, and the type system don't warn you. Whereas if you have like normal variants, the type system will always warn you if you have some case that you're not checking. So that's like the main drawback. I think there are other drawbacks as well that I don't remember, but that's like the one that I've been hit by. I'm just reading through the comments now. Oh yeah, that's a good point. That like stuff is focused on like more functional. Like you kind of had to write stuff in a functional way in Reason. Well, that's a good link. What are you finding you're spending the most of your time on your regular work days with Reason? So most of the time we build features. That's kind of the easy. So what are you spending most of your time on when working with Reason was the question. So most of the time it's just writing feature code. It's not like I don't feel that I'm spending too much time on anything. The good thing about Reason is like maybe you do a bit more typing than you would in TypeScript for some things, but it's really expressive and it's easy to get in the flow of writing code. Like you write stuff until it works, then you run it and then it works. But I think like you spend the same amount of time on the same type of code as you would write in TypeScript, if that makes sense. Cool. So are there any more questions? That's a resounding silence. Cool. And then thank you for coming here.